Healing starts the moment you stop blaming yourself. This isn't just a motivational phrase or something we say to make ourselves feel better. It's a profound truth that sits at the very heart of psychological recovery and emotional well-being. When we're trapped in cycles of self-blame, we're essentially creating an internal environment where healing becomes nearly impossible. Think about it this way. If you had a physical wound and you kept picking at it, criticizing it, telling it how ugly and problematic it was, would that wound heal faster or slower? The same principle applies to our emotional and psychological wounds. Self-blame is like constantly picking at a healing wound, preventing the natural recovery process from taking place. The work of renowned physician and trauma expert Dr. Gabor Maté has shown us time and again that self-blame is not just counterproductive, it's actively harmful to our healing process. When we blame ourselves for our struggles, our addictions, our trauma responses, or our mental health challenges, we're essentially reinforcing the very patterns that keep us stuck. We're telling our nervous system that we're dangerous, that we can't be trusted, that we're fundamentally flawed. This creates a state of chronic stress and hypervigilance that makes genuine healing virtually impossible. Our bodies and minds can't relax into recovery when they're constantly under attack from our own internal critic. Understanding the difference between responsibility and blame is crucial here. Taking responsibility means acknowledging our role in our healing journey, recognizing our patterns, and making conscious choices to change what we can change. Blame, on the other hand, is about punishment, shame, and harsh judgment. It's the voice that says, "You should have known better. It's all your fault. You're weak for struggling with this." Responsibility empowers us and moves us forward, while blame paralyzes us and keeps us stuck in cycles of shame and self-attack. When we can make this distinction, we open up space for genuine self-compassion and healing to begin. The neuroscience behind self-blame reveals why it's so destructive to our healing process. When we engage in self-blame, we activate the same neural pathways associated with threat detection and survival responses. Our brains literally can't tell the difference between external danger and internal self-attack. This means that chronic self-blame keeps us in a perpetual state of fight or flight, flooding our systems with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. In this state, our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain responsible for higher-order thinking, emotional regulation, and decision-making, goes offline. We become reactive rather than responsive, making it incredibly difficult to make the thoughtful, intentional choices that support healing. One of the most profound insights from trauma-informed care is that our struggles often make perfect sense when we understand the context in which they developed. That addiction, that anxiety, that depression, that pattern of unhealthy relationships, these aren't character defects or moral failings. They're adaptive responses to difficult circumstances, survival strategies that once served a purpose, even if they're no longer serving us well. When we can see our challenges through this lens of compassion and understanding rather than blame and judgment, everything changes. We move from being victims of our own harsh criticism to becoming allies in our own healing journey. Self-blame often stems from early experiences where we learned that love and acceptance were conditional on our behavior or performance. As children, when faced with family dysfunction, trauma, or neglect, we naturally assume it must be our fault somehow. This makes sense from a developmental perspective. It's actually less threatening for a child to believe they're bad than to accept that their caregivers or environment might be unsafe or unreliable. At least if their fault, they maintain some sense of control and hope that if they just try harder or be better, things will improve. This childhood adaptation, while protective at the time, often persists into adulthood and becomes a major barrier to healing. The internal critic that drives self-blame is often an internalized version of critical voices from our past. Maybe it sounds like a harsh parent, a demanding teacher, or a cruel peer. This voice promised to keep us safe by making sure we never made mistakes, never disappointed anyone, never showed weakness. But what it actually does is create an internal environment of chronic stress and self-attack that makes authentic growth and healing nearly impossible. Recognizing this critic as a protective part that's trying to help, even though its methods are harmful, allows us to approach it with curiosity rather than more criticism. When we stop blaming ourselves, we create space for genuine curiosity about our experiences. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" we can begin to ask, "What happened to me? And what do I need to heal?" This shift in questioning moves us from a place of shame and pathology to one of understanding and possibility. Curiosity is healing in itself. It engages our prefrontal cortex, calms our nervous system, and opens us up to new perspectives and solutions. When we approach our struggles with genuine curiosity rather than harsh judgment, we naturally begin to see new possibilities for healing and growth. The process of releasing self-blame often involves grieving. Grieving the harsh treatment we've given ourselves, grieving the time we've lost to self-attack, grieving the opportunities for healing we may have missed while we were stuck in cycles of blame. This grief is natural and necessary. It's a sign that we're beginning to recognize our own worth and to feel genuine compassion for the person who has been struggling. Allowing ourselves to feel this grief rather than judging ourselves for it is an important part of the healing process. Self-compassion becomes possible when we stop the constant assault of self-blame. Self-compassion isn't about making excuses or avoiding responsibility. It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we would offer a good friend who was struggling. It involves recognizing our shared humanity, the fact that struggle, pain, and imperfection are part of the human experience, not personal failings. When we can hold our struggles with compassion rather than blame, we create the emotional safety necessary for genuine healing to occur.
The body holds trauma and stress in profound ways, and self-blame creates additional layers of tension and dysfunction in our physical systems. When we're constantly attacking ourselves internally, our muscles tighten, our breathing becomes shallow, our digestion suffers, and our immune system becomes compromised. The moment we begin to release self-blame, our bodies often respond with a noticeable sense of relief and relaxation. This physical shift creates a foundation for deeper healing to occur on all levels: emotional, mental, and spiritual. Recovery from addiction, trauma, depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges becomes exponentially more possible when we remove the barrier of self-blame. Think about it. If you're trying to heal from addiction while simultaneously telling yourself you're weak, worthless, and fundamentally flawed, you're working against yourself at every turn. Your recovery efforts become contaminated with shame and self-attack, making sustainable change nearly impossible. But when you can approach your recovery with self-compassion and understanding, you become your own greatest ally rather than your own worst enemy. Have you ever noticed how much energy self-blame consumes? All that mental and emotional energy spent in self-attack could be redirected toward actual healing and growth. When we're not constantly fighting against ourselves, we have more resources available for the real work of recovery. Developing healthy coping strategies, building supportive relationships, addressing underlying trauma, and creating meaningful change in our lives. It's like the difference between trying to run a race while someone is constantly tripping you versus having that same person cheering you on from the sidelines. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video and for being open to exploring these ideas about healing and self-compassion. I know it takes courage to examine our relationship with ourselves, especially when we've been stuck in patterns of self-blame for a long time. Your willingness to question these patterns and consider new possibilities is already a step toward healing. The relationship between self-blame and perfectionism is particularly toxic to our healing process. Perfectionism tells us that we should have handled things better, should have known better, should have been stronger. It sets impossible standards and then attacks us mercilessly when we inevitably fail to meet them. But healing isn't about perfection. It's about progress, compassion, and gradual growth. When we can release the perfectionist demands that fuel our self-blame, we make room for the messy, imperfect, but ultimately beautiful process of genuine healing to unfold.
Breaking free from self-blame often requires us to challenge deeply held beliefs about ourselves and the world. Maybe we believe that if we're not hard on ourselves, we'll become lazy or complacent. Maybe we think that self-blame somehow protects us from future pain or mistakes. These beliefs, while understandable, are ultimately false and harmful. The research is clear. Self-compassion actually motivates positive change more effectively than self-criticism. When we feel safe and supported, even by ourselves, we're more likely to take healthy risks, learn from mistakes, and persist through challenges. The healing that becomes possible when we stop blaming ourselves isn't just individual. It ripples out into all our relationships and interactions. When we're not constantly at war with ourselves, we have more capacity for genuine connection, empathy, and love. We stop projecting our own self-attack onto others, and we become better able to offer the kind of compassion and understanding that supports healing in our communities. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of personal healing. It never stops with us. Sometimes people worry that if they stop blaming themselves, they'll lose motivation to change or improve. This fear is understandable, but unfounded. The motivation that comes from self-blame is ultimately unsustainable because it's based on fear, shame, and threat. The motivation that comes from self-compassion and understanding is much more reliable and effective because it's based on genuine care for our well-being. When we want to change because we love ourselves, not because we hate ourselves, that change is more likely to be sustainable and authentic. Forgiveness often becomes possible when we stop blaming ourselves, not because we excuse harmful behavior or pretend everything's fine, but because we create space for understanding and compassion. When we can see our own struggles with kindness rather than harsh judgment, we often find that we can extend that same understanding to others who have hurt us. This doesn't mean we have to maintain harmful relationships or ignore boundaries, but it does mean we can release the poison of resentment that keeps us trapped in cycles of pain. The moment we begin to question our self-blame, we start to reclaim our power. Self-blame is actually a form of learned helplessness. It convinces us that we're fundamentally flawed and that change is impossible. But when we begin to see our struggles as understandable responses to difficult circumstances rather than evidence of our inherent defectiveness, we remember that we have agency, choice, and the capacity for healing. This shift from powerlessness to empowerment is often the turning point in recovery.
You know what's funny about asking for likes on a video about self-compassion? It's like I'm practicing what I'm preaching. Instead of demanding or guilting you into engagement, I'm simply asking with the same kind of gentle approach we should take with ourselves. So if this message about healing and releasing self-blame resonates with you, if it offers you even a small moment of relief from your own inner critic, then maybe give it a like. Not because you have to, but because it feels good to acknowledge when something touches us in a meaningful way. Just like healing starts when we stop attacking ourselves, genuine appreciation starts when we stop forcing it and let it flow naturally. Trauma responses that we often blame ourselves for, like hypervigilance, people-pleasing, emotional numbing, or difficulty with intimacy, make complete sense when we understand them as protective adaptations. Our nervous systems developed these responses to keep us safe in threatening situations. The problem isn't that we developed these responses. The problem is that we're often stuck in them long after the original threat has passed. When we can appreciate our trauma responses as evidence of our survival wisdom rather than failures or character defects, we create the compassionate foundation necessary for gentle nervous system regulation and healing. The healing journey isn't linear, and there will be days when the old patterns of self-blame try to reassert themselves. This is normal and expected. Healing rarely happens in a straight line. What matters is that we notice when we've slipped back into self-attack and gently guide ourselves back to compassion. It's like learning to walk. We wouldn't blame a toddler for falling down while learning to walk, and we shouldn't blame ourselves for occasionally stumbling as we learn new ways of relating to ourselves. Each time we choose compassion over criticism, we strengthen our capacity for self-love and healing. The biochemistry of self-compassion is fascinating and hopeful. When we practice self-kindness, our bodies release oxytocin, the same hormone associated with bonding and connection. Our parasympathetic nervous system activates, promoting rest, repair, and healing. Our heart rate variability improves, which is associated with better emotional regulation and overall health. In contrast, self-blame triggers the release of stress hormones that suppress immune function, disrupt sleep, and interfere with our body's natural healing processes. From a purely biological perspective, self-compassion creates the optimal internal environment for healing to occur. Recovery communities and therapeutic approaches that emphasize self-compassion consistently show better outcomes than those based on shame and blame. This isn't surprising when we understand how the brain and nervous system respond to safety versus threat. When people feel safe to explore their struggles without judgment, when they're met with understanding rather than criticism, they're much more likely to engage authentically in the healing process. They're more willing to be honest about their challenges, more open to trying new strategies, and more persistent in the face of setbacks.
As we near the end of our exploration today, I want to reflect on the profound courage it takes to stop blaming ourselves. In a culture that often equates self-criticism with responsibility and self-compassion with weakness, choosing kindness toward ourselves is actually a radical act. It requires us to trust that we are worthy of love and healing, even in our struggles. It asks us to believe that our pain matters, that our healing is possible, and that we deserve the same compassion we would offer to anyone else who is suffering. This choice to treat ourselves with kindness isn't just about feeling better. It's about creating the conditions where genuine transformation becomes possible. The ripple effects of this inner transformation extend far beyond our personal healing. When we stop the cycle of self-blame and self-attack, we model a different way of being in the world. We show others that it's possible to hold struggles with compassion, that mistakes don't define our worth, and that healing is always possible. We become living examples of the truth that our struggles don't make us broken, they make us human. And in our shared humanity, we find not reasons for blame, but countless reasons for compassion, understanding, and hope. Thank you so much for spending this time exploring these ideas about healing and self-compassion with me. If this message resonated with you, if it offered you even a moment of relief from your own inner critic, I'd be grateful if you'd give this video a like. And if you feel moved to share your own experiences with releasing self-blame, or if you have insights about your own healing journey that might help others, please leave a comment below. Your story matters, and sharing it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If you're interested in more content about healing, trauma, and finding peace with ourselves, feel free to subscribe to the Not What It Seems channel, and you might want to check out the next video that's appearing on your screen. Remember, healing starts the moment you stop blaming yourself, and that moment can be right now.